So this first slide shows the full lifetime of an app and what happens when Android needs more memory, or the user starts another app, or the user starts a new activity within our app. So when the activity is started for the first time, its onCreate method's called. Now because this is the first time the activity is started, there's no saved state, so the bundle is null and nothing needs to be restored, because obviously we're coming from a clear slate. We've just started the application for the first time. Now, although on the diagram I've got a call to onRestore instance state, this isn't always called, and in fact it's only called when bundle is not null. So the first time you start the app, this method will not be called. There's nothing to restore, so Android doesn't bother calling it, and I'll come back to that one later. So the next methods to be called after the onCreate are onStart and onResume. Now once onStart has been called, the activity is visible but may not yet be in a state where the user can interact with it. Once onResume has been called, the activity is in the foreground and it's in a running state. It's in front of all other activities and the user can interact with it quite happily. Now there are many events that can result in the activity going between the running and the paused states. So things like the device going to sleep, for example. If you put code in the onPause and the onResume methods, then it shouldn't do a lot, and what it does do should be done quickly. If "twere done is best, twere done quickly," as Shakespeare wrote, although he's probably thinking of deeds a bit darker than waking a phone up. The point is, in those methods, you can't really spend a lot of time and do sort of heavy processing. We've got to keep processing to a minimum before the system takes over and either pauses or resumes. Now, while the activity is running, another activity could be brought into the foreground, or the phone could go to sleep. So you'll see us starting new activities in the course when we launch a new activity to perform some actions, such as editing a contact record. If that happens, the current activity is paused, and the onPause method is called before the current activity then loses control. The activity is still in a happy state, and there's no need to save the state and restore it again. It's just no longer in the foreground. So if you display a dialog on top of your activity, you'll also put the activity into the pause state, so onPause will be called at that point in time. So what happens next depends on what goes on with the system. Now if the user brings the activity back to the foreground by dismissing a dialog, for example, then onResume is called. Now if the system needs more memory and decides to kill the app, then onStop is called. And that's represented by the arrows on the right hand side of the image on this slide. Now if the user presses the back button to close your activity, then the activity is destroyed completely. The only trace of it at that point is in the recent apps, but it's no longer running at all, and that's the end of its life cycle. Now if the user launches it again, then everything starts from the top. At that point there's no saved state, so onSave instance state will not be called, and also the bundle passed to onCreate will be null at that point again. However, if the activity is destroyed as a result of a configuration change, or because Android needs its resources, then Android actually remembers that it did exist, the activity, and was killed by the system. So when the app is restarted by the user, its onCreate is called, this time with a bundle containing the saved state. So in the case of a configuration change, the same thing happens, but the activity is restarted automatically. There's no need for the user to launch it again. However, if Android kills an app that's in the foreground, then something's gone seriously wrong. So Android will kill background processes to recover memory, but not the foreground activity. Now that's represented by the arrows on the left-hand side of the image on this slide. And note also that onDestroy may not always be called. We'll see in a minute that onSave instance state and onRestore instance state aren't always called either. They're only actually called if the system detects that there's a need for them to be called. As a result, the Google documentation recommends that you save user data in onPause rather than in the onSave instance state method. So that's the theory, but how can we test it and see what's actually happening and to see whether this image is a true representation of the various methods that are called on our behalf in an activity? Well, one very valuable technique is to implement all those methods and to put some code in them that logs the fact that they were called, sort of to output something so that we can sort of verify that the method was called. And if we're logging it and we're seeing some output, that lets us confirm that the methods are called, but also more importantly, in what order. So let's look at doing that, implementing some logging so we can confirm the order that these methods are called for the activity lifecycle in the next video.